Let's resume with our discussion. So last time we were looking at the second meditation, which you already have with you. And it is here where we ended up our discussion. And let's continue from here. In the discourse on method, Descartes formulates the cogito in something more like an inference, which he writes as cogito ergo sum. It is not therefore in the meditations on first philosophy that we see cogito ergo sum, but we find it in the discourse on method. The ergo term is significant because it means therefore in Latin, suggesting that in the context, Descartes understands the cogito as a deductive from general to particular. In the Meditations, Descartes says only that whenever he thinks about the question, he knows with absolute epistemic certainty that he exists. The distinction between whether the cogito is indeed as an inference or principle is important, because many critics have objected that it would be circular reasoning to infer from the assumption, I think, the conclusion, therefore I exist. The question is, what could entitle Descartes to begin with the premise that anything at all is true of an I, an ego, self, person, or soul that thinks without assuming from the outset that an I exists? What or who is this I that Descartes believes thinks, and how does the epistemic certainty that such a thing exists contribute to Descartes' goal of rebuilding all of knowledge with the same degree of certainty? In Descartes' defense, it might be said that even if he is not justified in immediately accepting the assumption, I think, unless or until he establishes the conclusion, I exist, he can nevertheless infer the proposition without much difficulty. The problem is much the same even in Descartes' cogito sum formulation in the Meditations as in the cogito ergo sum version in the discourse. The issue is whether Descartes is correct to speak of an I, of whether or not an assumption about the I can justifiably be incorporated into Descartes' reasoning as part of a deductive inference. Reference to the I is explicit even by the inflected Latin ending o in the term cogito, which is literally translated I think. Critiques of Descartes' cogito ergo sum in the discourse and the cogito sum in the Meditations often allow that Descartes is justified in beginning with the assumption thinking occurs, even if it is not the thinking specifically of an I, ego, person, self, or soul. The proposition might nevertheless be all that Descartes needs to in order to work his way back to the original assumption, I think, in which reference to the first person thinker appears. In anything resembling an Aristotelian framework of substance and properties, it seems unavoidable to conclude that if thinking occurs, then the predicable thinking must apply to a substance, a subject, or thinking thing. What harm, let us ask rhetorically, can there be then be in stipulating that such a thinking substance, the only one that each of us experiences directly rather than infers from the eternal behavior of others, the subject of thinking or thinking thing, as we can only directly know it, be called I? Is this purely a linguistic convention? If this is not unreasonable, then Descartes is in a comfortable position from which to deduce, I think, from the more cautious pronouncement that thinking occurs. Descartes reaffirms his commitment to the first person subject of experience and its psychological state as something whose existence is incapable of being rationally doubted. We can see that more clearly in this quote, beginning with the word but. Let's read that. But what therefore am I? A thinking thing. What is that? I mean, a thing that doubts, that understands, that affirms, that denies, that wishes to do this and does not wish to do that, and also that imagines and perceives by the senses. Well, indeed, there is quite a lot there. If all these things really do belong to me, but why should they not belong to me? Is it not me who currently doubts without everything, who nonetheless understands something, who affirms this alone to be true, and denies the rest, who wishes to know more, and wishes not to be deceived, who imagines many things, even against his will, and is aware of many things that appear to come via the senses? Is there any of these things that is not actually true as the fact that I exist, even if I am always asleep, and even if my Creator is deceiving me to the best of his ability? Is there any of them that can be distinguished from my thinking? Is there anything, is there any that can be said to be separate from me? Descartes' final question in this quote, final questions even, because there are a lot, no? Beginning from this entire paragraph even, sets the problem for the next step in his program. If he has demonstrated his own epistemically certain existence as a thinking thing, then the further task for his first philosophy, as he clearly recognizes, is to determine what, if anything, can be known of the same high degree of epistemic certainty as existing outside himself. Beyond the limits and contents of his thoughts, he proposes in a series of steps that he can in fact prove the existence of God. So if we may just repeat what's going on already at this point, you'd realize that Descartes had already, to a certain extent, proven that his thinking is indubitable, something that cannot be doubted. And of course, you already know that the criteria for such is in fact a two, clarity and distinctness. But we will see that more clearly in a bit. it's very important to recognize this one, no? In the comment section below, please answer this question. What can we learn from Descartes' proposal to ground all of philosophy and science on the indubitable existence of the self? Let me repeat the question. What can we learn from Descartes' proposal to ground all of philosophy and science on the indubitable existence of the self? If you've understood this discussion, please click next. But of course, only after answering the question that I've raised below. If not, please listen to it again. Thank you and see you in the next section.